welcome to the special panel discussion on disaster risk management challenges and way forward. Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in fact, had released the National Disaster Management Plan, or NDMP, this year on 1st of June. And in fact, this was the first ever National Disaster Management Plan prepared in the country. Now, the NDMP has been aligned broadly with the goals and priorities and set out in the Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction. And today on the show, we will examine the high points of the NDMP, the major takeaways, and also the challenges confronting disaster management apparatus in the country. Remember, the vision of this plan, NDMP plan, is to make actually India disaster resilient, also at the same time achieve substantial disaster risk reduction. Can we do that? What are the challenges ahead? And having said that, significantly also decrease the loss of life. And to do so, we're very glad to have a panel on the show tonight. We have on my left Professor A.K. Gosai. He's from IIT Delhi. Thank you very much, Professor Gosai, for joining us on the show. Kamal Kishore, member NDMA. Mr. Kishore, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, and extremely glad to have on our panel today Jaco Cilliers. He is Country Director, UNDP. Thank you very much, Jaco, for taking out time for us. Mr. Kishore, let me quickly start with you. The whole concept of NDMP, now that it is a reality in terms of, for the first time ever, we have a National Disaster Management Plan. The major takeaways from that, vis-a-vis all that which has been now formulated in practice, implemented on ground, although it's just been few months, but how are we actually going to go about it in terms of its implementation? Because that is exactly what makes it very important.
I think the most interesting thing about and the most important thing about the plan and its implementation is that it is taking disaster risk management not just as an isolated thing, but also working with the entire set of sectors, development sectors, including different ministries and agencies, ranging from railways to Ministry of Earth Sciences to Met departments to water resources and so on. So really bringing the capacities of all the departments. So that's the thing. That's the most important thing, that we are now going to get into a phase where disaster risk management will be done by everybody and not just by the National Disaster Management agencies only.
So when you say everybody, you mean the state apparatus, the state management, because you can't implement it without the assistance of the state machinery.
Absolutely. It's including both the different sectors, but also going down to the local level, from the panchayats to villages to districts to states. All levels of government have to work coherently, cogently towards reducing disaster risks in the country. And that's what the plan sets out to do.
The plan also, in fact, Professor Gosai, talks about science and technology. Is everything in place in terms of integrating technology with the current system that is in place? Because NDMP is a document. It needs to be implemented. So when we talk about the narrative of risk management, where do we stand vis-a-vis science and technology? How advanced are we?
You're right. Right now is the intent.
Okay.
And that is the beginning. You have to have a good intent if you want to solve the problems. But as you said, that science has to be used to really come out with the understanding of how you can reduce the risk. Mainly, if you look at, I'll give you an example of floods, which is one of the major disasters which our communities face on an annual basis. But many times we are not having the science used in terms of even finding out what is the floodplain zones. Are you sitting in a zone which is to be flooded every year? So you are sitting in a wrong place. Those are the things which have to be done by the states, looking after their own rivers. What is the susceptibility of a river to flood an area in terms of the number of years, whether it will recur every year, which is the area which will be flooded once in 25 years. And then you have to give the advisory to the local organizations that this is the area which has not to be used for the construction or even allowing the people to settle there.
Since we're talking here, practical examples, if we can just talk about it, and that in fact would help our viewer to understand it better. You got flood in Jammu and Kashmir, extreme north, and then you've got flood in Tamil Nadu. When we look back at 2014 floods in the valley, for at least few days, there was a complete breakdown of machinery and coordination, and the rest, as they say, is a different story. Tamil Nadu, it was a different ballgame altogether. Can we really tackle those challenge areas, extreme geographical conditions?
I think you are answering your question that science, whether the science was used to really allow people to occupy those areas which were flooded. No, it was against the science, because all these areas, in both the cases, in the case of the J&K, the area belonged to the river. It was part of the river floodplain, which has been allowed to be habitated. In the case of Tamil Nadu, it was on two accounts. One, again, the encroachment of the area. The other was, to a certain extent, the area, I mean, the one water body which was there, the water was left slightly at the wrong time when it peaked along with the other concentration from the local flood waters. So I think in both the cases, the avoidance was possible if you had analyzed the areas while designing while going in for the plans, which was the starting point. So the science has to be used in planning, as well as the other part is the management. So the planning is the starting point.
Okay. Jaco, let me come to you first of all. Once again, thanks for being on the show. What and how has been your experience so far in the last 3 years, especially the way UNDP has collaborated with our agencies like NDMA, etc., especially on ground when we've had disasters like floods, like earthquakes, etc. We've just had Uttarakhand a few years back, etc. What has been UNDP's experience?
I think UNDP has been very fortunate to work now since 2003 actively on disaster risk management, and also closely with the government. Originally with the Ministry of Home Affairs, but more recently also with nearly all the states in India in terms of 3 areas. One is really preparing in terms of the institutional frameworks for state governments to be better prepared for disasters. The second is also really in terms of preparedness for long-term planning, so that in development planning, disaster risk mitigation efforts are integrated in those areas. And I think then lastly also in terms of forecasting for longer term events, we see weather and climate change now affecting a lot more coastal communities, but also inland communities. And I think that is the great excitement that India as a whole, and especially at the state level, is starting to integrate many of these preparedness into its planning. We have a common saying that development can never be sustainable if it isn't risk informed. And I think what more, not only countries but also India is starting to realize that the preparedness and the investment in risk mitigation is really crucial for long-term development.
Do you see that happening here?
Definitely.
Investment in risk management.
Oh, definitely. And I think what we see is that many, not only states, but also communities are taking this actively. We have learned also across the world that unfortunately, it's first when a disaster hits that communities or actually countries really start to invest in those areas. That's not unique. But I think what we have seen in many of the places which has been really affected by these disasters, that preparedness in those areas have really not only saved lives, but also economically helped those communities to much quicker respond to some of these disasters. And that's enlightening to see in many of the states and many of the communities throughout India.
Oh, that's a very positive statement. Mr. Kishore, would you agree with him? And having said that, in terms of maximizing our ability to cope up with disasters at all levels, how are we really going to go about it? Why I'm asking this, because like I earlier mentioned, NDMP is a document, its implementation is crucial, because that's what really matters, and for that you have to have all stakeholders on board, especially the state administration, for which the coordination is must.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as Jaco said, we have made a lot of progress in the last few years. The example of the comparison between 1999 Odisha cyclone and 2013 Faline is given a lot, and the mortality figures from over 10,000 to just a little over 20 just shows the progress we've made. But what is also very interesting is that states are doing a lot of initiatives. They're taking a lot of initiatives on their own. Now we have 100% coverage in terms of state level disaster management plans. 90% of our districts now have district level disaster management plan, and I think by the end of this year all our districts will have district disaster management plans. we have to continue to make that investment at the local level, because disasters happen in towns and villages. They don't happen, in a country X. They happen in a specific location, and that's where you need the capacity. So that's going to be the next generation of push in terms of building capacity really at the local level.
Mr. Gosai, how does technology fall in place or come into picture when we talk about capacity building at micro level? How is there a way forward there?
I think again I'll mention I fully agree with what Kamal has said, that country is making a progress, but still I'm not satisfied with the progress, the way the country is making the progress.
I mean, we have had this NDMP document for the first time.
Yeah, no, that's one way. That is one thing. But the other thing is that how well we are implementing these things to avoid the disasters.
True.
So we can do the management after the disaster has taken place. That is the last thing I'll try to do. I'll try to avoid the man-made disasters. What happened last year in Gurgaon? It was again a man-made disaster, which was on account of very small little things not being implemented properly or not taking care of the drainage system. Those are issues which some disasters you might not be in a position to really control to that extent. For example, the seismic, the natural disasters. But the other disasters which are man-made, we should give a lot of emphasis on those, that how we should ensure that those disasters shouldn't be taking place at the local level. I again agree that the disasters take place when maximum damage is at the city level or.
So basically, you talk about understanding risk at the basic level.
No, I think is the question of preparing your local institutions at the city level. It has to be the local the local bodies, which are the municipalities. They have to be equipped with those kind of science, that they design the systems properly. The drainage of Delhi, everybody knows that every year we have the flooding. So why it should happen from year to year? Why we are not in a position to take care of the sewage properly? That is again a man-made disaster. These disasters are equally bad in comparison to what the other disasters we are talking about.
Jaco, are we following the best global practices here? Is UNDP helping us to do so? And the latest that you're getting on table in terms of not managing risk, but basically making it sure that the effects are mitigated?
Well, I think together with the government and many of the institutions and also communities working in this area, I think the UN family is also introducing many of those opportunities, whether it's through advocacy or also through best examples or best practices. But India in and of itself is also learning, through doing and by experiencing some of these challenges on a day-to-day basis, but also on a larger level. I think there's a common understanding that Asia as a whole, and India within that region, is affected 6 times more than people living, say for instance, in Latin America, and even in 30 times more than those living in Europe by disasters. So the size of the disasters in this region is really quite large, and I think if one takes that into consideration, these investments and these lessons that have been learned globally, whether it is like Kamal mentioned, coordination through a systems approach to how you deal with disasters, or how different institutions communicate with each other to respond quickly to these disasters, are absolutely important. And again, that is being learned here. India is also in many ways setting examples to the rest of the world what can be done and what can also effectively address some of these areas. Obviously there are challenges, there continue to be challenges, but I think also the way that it is being handled is very encouraging.
Okay, at the positive note, we're going to slip into a very short break. We're talking about disaster management, disaster risk management. When we come back from the break, we're going to flag some certain areas of concerns vis-a-vis challenges. Challenges that UNDP has identified, and challenges that are actually incorporated in our NDMP, that is the National Disaster Management Plan, and how to basically go about that. All that and much more on the other side. Don't go away, stay tuned. Welcome back, and you're watching the special panel discussion on disaster risk management and way forward. Let's continue with our discussion. Mr. Kishore, coming to you, the whole concept of understanding risk and capacity building. Earlier, in fact, you talked about how to reach at the micro level, because municipal, panchayat, etc. what are the challenges that now we're going to confront with when we are implementing this plan, and how do we confront those challenges?
See, there are three sets of challenges with regards to implementation of the plan. The first set of challenge is that the spirit of the plan is that disaster risk management is not the business of disaster managers alone. All sectors have to work on it. Professor Gosai a few minutes ago talked about cities or towns not doing a good job of drainage management. That's really a disaster risk management issue, if you look at it in a fundamental sense. And for that, it is not disaster risk managers who will do it. It is actually the development sector. It is an urban development issue. So I think the first challenge is how do we bring all the sectors, water resources sector, urban development sector, rural development sector, housing, infrastructure on to the disaster risk management issue so that they see it as an integral part of their planning. The second thing is how do we build capacity at the local level? Our municipalities who are tasked with the responsibility to implement building codes. We have excellent building codes even for earthquake risk reduction, for floods and so on, but the capacity at that level is very limited. So how do we build capacity at that level to actually implement, to enforce those building codes? That's the second thing. The third thing is that we've made huge progress, and Professor Gosai just talked about it. A lot of scientific and technical knowledge is available. But how do we convert that scientific and technical knowledge into something that is usable, understandable, applicable for solving problems at the local level? So these are the key challenges.
Professor Gosai, integration?
Yes, I think integration
is technology the real answer? The one-time solution? Not really one-time solution, but one of the most important implementable solution.
Technology per se is there, is available. Again, I think Kamal is mentioning that is available, and India is quite in a good position that our people who understand technology, they are at a level which is comparable to any international level. The question is of implementation. So I feel that one thing which can play a major role, that the interaction between the academia, which are the local institutions, local universities, they should interact very closely with the local bodies and build their capacity, because I doubt that people coming from outside, whether it's under the World Bank or under UNDP, those consultants come for a short period, and that is not sustainable. They can still come, but they can interact with the local bodies and along with the academia, which is the local stakeholders as well as the local technology people. They should keep on working with these local organizations for a longer duration, maybe 5 years, 10 years, and then you'll find the difference. And the second point is more important, that how we make it implement. How good is your local bodies to implement those directives or the management plans in place? The paper has all the things. We have very good rules and regulations, where we have got very good policies. But in the end, nothing works. You have been struggling with various aspects of disasters. The implementation doesn't come through. And I feel, when I'm talking of disaster management, I'm talking not in terms of the post-disaster activities. I'm talking to avoid the disasters in the very first place, whether it's a chemical handling, the chemical leakage, or the floods, building construction. So you have to enforce all those rules and regulations which you have to put in place.
Basically, strengthening disaster risk governance. If I'm not wrong, the NDMP has covered it big way. Jaco, you were listening to Professor Gosai, in fact nodding. Would you agree with this specific point of UNDP and other international agencies and their association and integration with our national systems or mechanisms that are already in place? Are you satisfied the way things are being implemented, or do you think that, I understand there are challenges, but we need to fine-tune it more?
Well, I think, the challenges for me comes in actually in 3 C's. The first is really the commitment, which I think people have mentioned. To have a plan is one thing. To have the commitment to implement the plan is something else. And I think that takes a dedication at all levels. I think the challenge with some areas like disaster risk mitigation is that unfortunately people often just implement the plan after the disasters has happened. And I think that's what we have all learned. This is a global challenge. And I think making that commitment right up front is really important. The second is really investing in capacities. And I think that is also important. You need to have people trained at all levels that can quickly respond to some of these needs, but also has the knowledge and the capacities to prepare communities for how to deal with these challenges. The examples
how has
that were
been your
mentioned.
Experience with the communities?
Well, I think we have had a lot of work with communities, and I think the example that was mentioned in Odisha, where preparedness went into community preparedness, and it saved a tremendous amount of lives ahead of time. That's a perfect example why communities should be involved. If they're informed, they know how to act and they know what to do. But lastly, what I also want to say is, that it also takes a commitment to really change, and that is really important, because I think once that happens and once that is implemented from the national level right down to the community level, you see that the saving in lives, but also I think the economic and social benefits that happens in these investments.
Just to wrap up, I want to have your closing comments first. What's the way forward in UNDP's experience with the disaster risk management mechanism that are already in place?
Well, I think what we have seen is that there's wonderful examples in India where both at the national level, at the state level, but also at the community level, there's concrete actions being taken and people are investing in terms of disaster risk mitigation. I think that is really important. And if some of those examples can be duplicated at all levels, at all communities, I think you have a wonderful plan, and it's really, very, very much encouraging to see what's happening here.
All right. Professor Gosai, your final comments?
I think
way forward.
At the local level, at the community level, there are things which can be done, but I think majority of the things need much bigger involvement, need the state involvement where big things have to be done. So you cannot, in one go, you cannot equate all the disasters. Disasters of the kind which is Orissa, which is a natural, the cyclone has come, so nobody can stop the cyclone. So you're only waiting for the cyclone
to happen and then manage the after
and manage the thing. But there are other disasters where you have to take the prior action. If you're making the embankments around a river, you have to see that what happens if there is a breach. There's a breach of one of the embankments, then the flooding is going to be much bigger in those areas where the breach has occurred and is infected. Similarly, in the case of other disasters where you are getting flooded because of the routine flooding. So I think you have to look at specific kind of disaster and then think in terms of there are ones which are you have to take actions at the community level, at the local level, but there are others where the state has to take actions. So we have to differentiate between them.
Yes.
But I think is a good beginning. And I'm always positive that things can be done, but there's a lot to be done.
Mr. Kishore, very briefly.
Very briefly, I think there is no substitute for investing in local capacity, making science and technology more accessible, usable. And finally, we haven't touched upon much in this discussion, is really awareness generation and creating a social demand for disaster reduction. And NDMP attempts to do that. Take an all-of-society approach, bring everyone together to work on disaster risk.
But India is on the right path?
Definitely.
All right. On that note, thank you very much, my panelists. Jaco Cilliers, Country Director, UNDP, for joining us. I also thank member NDMP Kamal Kishore. Thank you very much. And many thanks, Professor A.K. Gosai from IIT Delhi. Well, we're running out of time. Let's quickly thank viewers also for tuning into the special discussion on disaster risk management challenges and way forward, as put in by the UNDP representative here in India, that when it comes to this particular concept of disaster risk management, India is definitely on the right track, especially when Prime Minister Modi in this year also, in fact, launched the first ever national plan called NDMP. It's already there, but what is important is its implementation. On that note, we are going to wrap up here, but news and updates continue on DD News, India's national broadcaster. Namaskar.